Justin Trudeau wants to promote Canadian content online, but in doing so, he's trying to control the internet. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Trade. If you love coffee as much as I do, you need to check this out. Trade matches your taste preferences with top quality craft coffee roasters. These are small businesses that pay farmers fair prices for sustainably sourced coffee. Trade coffee is excellent, and I'll tell you more at the end. So, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants Canadian media content to get the attention it deserves. And no, Canadian actors playing American superheroes don't count. According to Trudeau, Canadians should see Canadian content ahead of content from other countries. The free market solution, of course, would be for Canadians to start making content that doesn't suck. Like, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Remember that? That was good. But Trudeau has a much easier, more authoritarian solution. A law that would give him sweeping powers to decide what Canadians get to watch, which is why he wants Parliament to pass Canada's Online Streaming Act, also known as Bill C-11. Here's how Canada's Heritage Minister, Pablo Rodriguez, describes it.
It will be easier to find Canadian stories and music. It will support Canadian artists, creators, and create jobs. It will support racialized and Indigenous creators. It will make content more accessible. And finally, it will ensure online streaming companies who benefit from Canadian audiences also contribute to Canadian culture.
Great! What Canadian wouldn't want to support Canadian content? At least I think that's what he said. I had a hard time paying attention with that funky music in the background. If that was made in Canada, then I support this, just so I can get that bop on my playlist. Canada's Online Streaming Act was introduced in the House in February and is still being debated. The bill aims to do a few things. First off, it's meant to update Canada's Broadcasting Act for the 21st century. The Broadcasting Act is from the 1990s, and since so much of what we watch is online now, the idea is to regulate streaming services by reclassifying them as broadcasters. The government calls this leveling the playing field, although I'm pretty sure streaming services don't need the help. It's not like broadcast television is putting up a fight these days. If the Online Streaming Act passes, it means platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime would be regulated the same way as television. But it also opens the door to the Canadian government to regulate other online video platforms, like YouTube. I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the main reasons the government wants these platforms to be reclassified is so that they pay the same fees that broadcasters do. Yeah, leveling the playing field was a bunch of baloney, or Canadian bacon. What the government really wants is to get companies to pay more money. In theory, those broadcasting fees would go into government funds that support Canadian content creators, like musicians and journalists. Wait, paying into a fund to help Canadian content creators, isn't that what ads do already? I'm genuinely asking. We get demonetized so often, I'm not sure where ad money is actually supposed to go. But I'd rather fund this show directly by working with great sponsors like Trade than paying a fee to produce content to fund the government so I can apply to the government to give me money to produce content. Anyway, the Canadian bill also claims to promote diversity. It says Canadian programming should serve Canadians from racialized communities and diverse ethnocultural backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, abilities and disabilities, sexual orientations, gender identities and expressions, and ages. Nothing in there about providing diverse opinions on the Canadian government, though. And lastly, the bill requires streaming platforms to promote Canadian-made content. The government says it will ensure that online streaming services showcase Canadian music and stories and support our creators and producers. So let's take a look at how streaming services would be regulated exactly. The Online Streaming Act would allow the same government body that regulates radio and TV to regulate streaming platforms. That body is called the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or CRTC. The CRTC has 13 members appointed by the Governor-General of Canada. The Governor-General is the representative of Queen Elizabeth. So the Queen of England would have a hand in what gets shown on Netflix in Canada, which means you'll be seeing a lot more of this and a lot less of this. But normally the Governor-General acts on advice from the Prime Minister's federal cabinet. So Justin Trudeau and his team basically get to pick the members of the CRTC. You know, a totally independent body. Canada's Heritage Minister says the Online Streaming Act is mostly about regulating the big labels, not online creators, even very popular ones.
So let me be extremely clear. No users, no online creators will be regulated. No digital first creators, no influencers, no cat videos. Only the companies themselves will have new responsibilities.
But critics say that's just a bunch of baloney, or Canadian bacon, because the bill would give the government enormous power over what Canadians see and hear. I'll tell you how after the break. Welcome back. The Canadian government wants to pass a bill that would regulate streaming services and, to some extent, social media platforms. Now, critics of the bill warn of government overreach. They say vague language in the bill makes it unclear what exactly the government can and can't do. And after the trucker protests, people are a little wary of giving Justin Trudeau any more powers. The first problem with the bill is how it regulates user-generated content, the things ordinary Canadians upload to social media. Canada's Heritage Minister claims the Online Streaming Act exempts social media content from government regulation, but there's an exemption to the exemption. The CRTC can still regulate content on social media if it's considered a professional program. And CRTC gets to determine whether it's a professional program, using 3 criteria. The first is whether a program generates revenue, either directly or indirectly. The second is if it's posted or cross-posted on a licensed or registered entity with the CRTC. And the third is if the content uploaded is assigned a unique identifier under an international standard system. So how will these factors be weighed? We have no idea, which is one of the biggest problems critics have with this bill. They're basically saying, come on, trust us, just look at that face. No, not that one. Or that one. Come on, how many of these are there? According to the executive director at Digital First Canada, these criteria are so broad that they practically cover the whole internet. Direct or indirect revenue could literally be anything. Even if a piece of content itself isn't generating revenue for the creator, it's generating revenue for somebody. For example, the government tries to distinguish between professional and amateur content, but those categories aren't so cut and dry online. The government is the last entity that should be judging art, especially considering how badly Trudeau needs to stay away from paint. Canadian digital rights organization Open Media gives the example of podcasting to show how fuzzy the guidelines are. Podcasts can come from professional broadcasters like media outlets. They can also be from solo artists who do it for a living and make lots of money, but aren't professional media organizations. And then there are your typical amateurs who do it for fun from their basement. All of this content is posted on platforms that would be classified as broadcasting, like Spotify. All earn revenue, and all have unique identifiers of some kind. Until we know how the CRTC will be deciding what is amateur versus professional content, we're concerned that much of this output will be regulated. And because this loophole is about social media, this potentially opens social media companies up to heavy government regulation. Remember when I said this bill would require Canadian content to be promoted on streaming platforms? The CRTC could demand a social media company tweak their algorithm to push Canadian content. Now, the bill specifically says that the CRTC can't dictate what algorithms or source code a platform uses. But according to Open Media, this is a purely cosmetic fix. The CRTC still can ask platforms for an end result, meaning it will still be in the business of picking winners and losers on online feeds. So essentially, the government would be saying, we're not manipulating the algorithm, we're manipulating the people who manipulate the algorithm. See, way less shady. If this happens, it could really hurt America Uncovered and China Uncensored, which means I might have to start Canada Unfrozen. But I won't be able to criticize Justin Trudeau or the Queen, so it'll be incredibly boring, just like everything else produced in Canada. Except for Are You Afraid of the Dark? That show really was good. Anyway, all this raises the issue of government overreach. And Trudeau and his allies don't have the best track record on transparency. I'll explain more after the break. Welcome back. Trudeau and his Liberal government say they're defending Canadian culture online, and they also say they're protecting free speech with the Online Streaming Act. But the bill gives Canada's broadcast regulators sweeping power over what Canadians watch, listen, and read online. So basically, they're saying they respect free speech so much that they need to control it and keep it in a cage. You know, to keep it safe. A lot of what these sweeping powers can do comes from what is called a policy direction. That's a set of directions that the government gives to the CRTC to tell it how to implement the law. The problem is, the government hasn't released the policy direction for the Online Streaming Act yet, which means that while it's being debated and voted on in Parliament, citizens and legislators don't actually know how it will be implemented. Trudeau is keeping them in the dark, which, as we know, is his favorite place to be. 3 Trudeau brown-faced jokes in a single episode. Make a wish, everybody. Canada's Heritage Minister said the policy direction will be made public once the Online Streaming Act is passed, which is like saying, you can trust me with your Ferraris. No, I won't tell you how I'll use it, but I promise I will after you give it to me. Deal? And trust is in short supply for the Trudeau government these days, especially around internet censorship. That's because last July, the Canadian government put out a vague proposal to address harmful content online, supposedly things like hate speech, child pornography, and terrorism. It asked for public feedback about the proposal. Hundreds of people and organizations responded, but the government didn't actually make their criticisms public. Instead, the government just issued their own summary. So they didn't show how people actually responded, only their own summary. That explains why the summary was just, Trudeau is doing a great job and boy, he sure is a looker, eh? But someone was able to get his hands on the original public feedback. He got it through an Access to Information Act request. He said it turned out the criticism of the government's plans were even more widespread than previously revealed. That's not exactly the image of a government that supports transparency and accountability, now is it? And that's especially creepy considering what this whole countering online harm proposal would do. The framework would establish new regulatory entities with broad authority over speech and information shared on platforms like Twitter or Facebook. Okay, but you also think I'm attractive, right? The framework has, shall we say, a few onerous requirements. One of them requires platforms to respond within 24 hours to claims that user content is illegal. The obvious end result would be that platforms' default would be to take down the content even if there's a question about its legality, just to avoid getting penalized. And will probably use bots to do it because that's cheaper and faster than humans. The proposal also included website blocking and automated filters with very questionable results. It also included the creation of a digital safety commissioner who would be in charge of enforcement. This includes the power to block and filter websites unilaterally. In response, Twitter wrote an official letter comparing this to authoritarian governments in China, North Korea, and Iran who block free speech under the false guise of online safety. Oh, come on, Trudeau is an authoritarian. I mean, have you ever heard of an authoritarian leader showing off shirtless pics of themselves? Okay, besides those guys. Even groups expected to support Trudeau's fight against digital harm had similar concerns. Despite the backlash, Trudeau seems set on both rooting out digital harms and promoting Canadian content online, even if it hurts content creators and free speech. This is why critics say Trudeau just wants to control the internet. And if Trudeau gets this power, there's no telling what he might do. Either way, hopefully I can get that jam on my playlist. And this episode is sponsored by Trade. I love Trade. I've been using it to buy my coffee for 2 years now. And that's because as a serious coffee drinker, I demand coffee that tastes really good, since I drink it black. And Trade is perfect for that. They help me find locally brewed coffee with the exact flavors and aromas I like. Personally, I'm into lighter roast with fruitier notes. Trade lets you customize your flavor profile, grind, roast preference, how adventurous you want to be with trying new flavors, even your brewing method. And they'll send you a new coffee to try as often as you like. For me, that's every single week. And the cool thing is, Trade will send you a different type of coffee each time based on your preferences. And when you find one you really like, you can also just keep ordering that one. So check it out with me. Right now, Trade is offering new subscribers a total of $30 off your first order, plus free shipping when you go to drinktrade.com/uncovered or click the link in the description below. So that's more than 40 cups of coffee for free. Get started by taking their quiz at drinktrade.com/uncovered and let Trade find you a coffee that you'll love. That's drinktrade.com/uncovered for $30 off. And let us know in the comments below what kind of coffee you got from Trade once you've tried it. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.